We will strongly regulate or close them down before we ever let this happen. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, those are the words, perhaps verbatim, perhaps slightly paraphrased from my memory, that President Trump tweeted out in response to Twitter's decision to label one of his tweets regarding mail-in ballots and to provide a link to counteract what they classified as misinformation. The mail-in ballot tweet from Trump essentially trotted out arguments that mail-in ballots are rife with fraud and opportunity for foul play. And Twitter then labeled it with a little exclamation point and said, get the facts, to put this in context, from CNN and I believe the Washington Post and The Hill, where those statements by Trump were fact-checked. Bill, in the past, Twitter has kind of given what they would call a newsworthiness exemption to world leaders, even when they state things that Twitter people think are false. What do you think of this landmark move by Twitter to decide to hold the president to some standards that they've already been holding others to?
Some others. I saw something related to this yesterday on Instapundit, a series of tweets from a guy who works at Twitter. I think it was Twitter, virtually positive it was Twitter. Who is in charge of their standards for integrity. I think that's the actual term. And in nothing but just the most vile, overt, anti-Trump, anti-conservative tweets again and again and again and again and again. This is the guy who decides what's appropriate, what's not appropriate.
So this is things he tweeted not in the context of his nominal position.
No, this is what somebody went and found.
His private tweets, basically, his
precisely
personal.
Correct.
Yes.
Which are they're not a little to the left. They're just plain openly insulting and vulgar and all, directed at Trump specifically and conservatives in general. This is the guy who determines integrity at Twitter. And let me give you my take on this, Scotty, because this has been going on for a long, long time. You know who really we need to blame for this? We need to blame ourselves. And I will never, ever, ever understand rather, how we as a conservative movement in this country, or just as Americans who cherish freedom and freedom of expression, it is beginning to dawn on me with ever greater strength every single day why we tolerate this. Moving the means of mass communication onto platforms that are private, that have the discretion to censor, suppress, hide, whatever, was the biggest mistake that we have ever made in the modern era. And it was virtually inevitable. When we were running blogs, none of us could afford the bandwidth to host videos. It was just out of the question. So everybody went to YouTube and you put your video up there for free. And for many years, they left you alone. But they are now in a situation where they are getting more and more aggressive about it. And as we get closer and closer to Election Day, they're going to be doing more and more of this. The good news is that every time something like this happens, it blows up in their face. But the bad news is we have got to get off of these platforms. And I don't know how to do it. The network effect is so powerful. The network effect basically says, hey, we could start forget a conservative network. How about one where we just let people say what they wanted to say? Just that's their business.
Well, Bill, essentially what you're calling for is,
but since there's nobody there, then there's no value for it.
Yeah, you're essentially calling on a bunch of people who have spent many years building up an online reputation to go back to a time when they were riding a donkey with pots clanging off the side
Correct.
of it. So restarting everything, human nature would dictate that that's never going to happen.
I agree.
Let me read you a quote that the Washington Post included from a professor, associate professor, mind you, of communication and media at the University of Michigan. He says this: "It's clear that social networking sites have a critical role to play in disseminating democratic speech and therefore in helping to police the boundaries of that speech. The fact that Twitter felt the need to take this action suggests that there is a point at which the preservation of democracy, in their view, overshadows the importance of remaining nonpartisan." I'd just like to get your reaction to that.
So are they saying that people who let's just put the very best possible face on these ignorant, elitist no good for nothing, arrogant bastards. Let's give them the maximum benefit of the doubt by saying, at the very least, these unelected individuals are determining what the American people should hear and determining other things that they shouldn't hear, and this is somehow saving democracy? Is that what he's trying to say?
Essentially, the sense I get from it is there's a point at which somebody, including the President of the United States, can go too far, and their freedom is a breach of everyone else's democratic liberty.
I see.
And it must be protected by this private company.
No. Oh, without doubt, because God knows that free speech is, we all are in favor of free speech so long as, we agree with it. Otherwise, it becomes dangerous and has to be restricted for the good of the people. This is, first of all, it's an expression of the contempt they have for everybody who's not one of them, and that arrogance is going to bite them, not because of anything that particularly is on the horizon, just because of human nature and human history and all of the cases in human history where hubris has been identified as the agent of a very big fall. They're not immune to this, and sooner or later that's going to catch up with them. The idea that, let's just reduce this to what it is. It is a free speech argument. And my father explained my free speech argument to me when I was just a lad. I've told this story before. I'll tell it very briefly again. When we were young, we would draw pictures of airplanes, and we would have the good guys with the stars on the wings shooting down the bad guys with the swastikas on the wings. And I did this relentlessly when I was a kid, and I could not get the swastika right because it's a strange thing to draw. And I practiced drawing it on my hand with the pen before I went to draw the next picture of it getting shot down. My father, who was in World War II, saw this on my hand and lost his mind. So I understand the visceral hatred that my father had for Nazism. He had a lot of his friends die fighting for that particular evil. Now, against that evil, needless to say. Now, when the marching occurred in Skokie, Illinois, when the American Nazi Party decided that they wanted to have a rally, and they were going to have it in the streets of Skokie, and I asked my dad about this and said, well, certainly they're going to ban these guys, right? And he said, no, they're not, and they shouldn't. And I said, why? He said, because if we ban their speech, that means someone decides what gets said and what doesn't get said. And that's what Nazism is. We have to let the Nazis march in order to not become Nazis ourselves. Wow.
Bill, it's interesting because Facebook has taken a different approach. The president or his campaign posted the same tweet about mail-in ballots to Facebook. And Facebook has basically said, look, when there's a political discussion over something like mail-in ballots, we're not going to step in. This is no threat to anybody. Twitter, feeling like they're trying to play catch up with Facebook. Twitter's a much smaller organization in terms of number of users served. I think they said they had 330 million Twitter users, where there's like 2-point-something billion Facebook users around the world. But Twitter at first was completely hands off. And then, around the time of the COVID pandemic, they started saying, well, we've got to counter disinformation about that. But this is a new expansion to basically say, in something unrelated to human health or safety, that they're going to step in because they believe it jeopardizes the elections. President Trump says exactly the same thing and says Twitter's actions are jeopardizing the election. What do you think of the idea of the President of the United States threatening a private company, a Republican president of the United States, threatening a private company with increased regulation and perhaps shutdown?
Well, when that private company's entire philosophical position is to silence the speech of people that they disagree with at their discretion, then I don't think that's an unreasonable position for the president to take. Now we get down to the brass tacks, because the whole network thing and starting a different Twitter thing, as you say, it's virtually impossible to do. But my legal knowledge of the details of this is imperfect, but nevertheless, there is an enormous club that can be used here. And this is the distinction made between a carrier and a content provider. Basically, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, let's just take those three. claim the legal protection of being carriers. Now, what that means is that I could post a video on YouTube, tweet it, and have it on Facebook saying, if you don't want to get coronavirus, you should go drink some aquarium cleaner. Now, if I were to do that, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube would claim their current status as carriers, which means that they would say we are not responsible for the content that this person creates because we are not content creators. We simply carry the message. That is entirely their responsibility, which is why you can see so many videos on YouTube, how millions of them have gameplay and movies, all kinds of things, millions and millions and millions of copyright violations going on every single day on YouTube. But YouTube says, no, Disney, you can't sue us because this guy put a bunch of your clips into one of his videos. That's not up to us. We're just the carriers. We're not the content providers. Okay, but when they start censoring content, when they start determining what is going to be carried, now they are content providers. Now they are. They are no longer free of the protection of that carrier status where they say, hey, we broadcast a message and we're not responsible for it. Once they start to decide what videos get suppressed, what videos get eliminated, which ones get demonetized, and it's all based on their personal political opinions, not a standard. There's no ironclad standard that says that these 5 words or 7 words that Carlin said, if those are in the video, you're not. No. There's all kinds of murder and mayhem and bloodiness on YouTube, but they don't care about that. They care about the political aspect of the speech. That means they're not carriers. And that is time now for somebody, ideally for the Department of Justice, to go after these people for violation of their legal obligations given the status that they've claimed under the law. This isn't a question of me telling a business what to do. It's me saying to a private business, you can have one or the other, and you're going to have to pick, but you don't get both.
So do you think conservatives in general would be comfortable with basically saying to YouTube, unlock the gates. Anybody can post anything, no matter how heinous, no matter how reprehensible, no matter how illegal in terms of its message or content. And the only people who are liable for that content are the producers of the content, not the distribution channel. Would conservatives in general back a position like that?
Well, I think you could basically ensure that they were not censoring things on a level of political or bias in any way. In other words,
so it's only political speech that matters here.
Well, it's not just political speech, but in other words, I don't think that you should be able to post pornography on YouTube.
Why not?
Now, because there are other obligations that come with carrier status. Now, we're assuming that we're going to try and put YouTube, as an example, Twitter as well, Facebook as well. We're going to try to put them into the category of carrier. A carrier has certain obligations, and that's why you can't run pornography on NBC TV. There are standards that the public has agreed upon and that are certainly degrading over time, but nevertheless, there are certain standards, and we all know what they are. You could easily have a situation where Facebook or where YouTube simply says no nudity of any kind is acceptable on YouTube. Your video will be pulled down because of that. That's not the kind of restriction on speech that we are talking about here. Now we're no longer talking about freedom of speech. We're now talking about a carrier's responsibility to the community, but that responsibility is based on a set of clearly understood standards. If I say no nudity, then that's pretty clear. And there are reasons why you might say no nudity. And that's not censorship. That's simply a standard. But you cannot tell me why a Prager video on the Korean War is demonetized and listed 18 only when Grand Theft Auto videos run for hours showing nothing but decapitations. Now that is censorship. That's political censorship. It's not a set of standards. It's censorship. It's active control of the message for political means.
One final quick question, Bill. The newsworthiness exemption that Twitter talks about, do you think that there's any substance to that? Let's say, for example, and I know this is going to be a stretch for you, but let's say that what President Trump just tweeted about mail-in ballots was provably false. But it wasn't tweeted by President Trump. It was tweeted by you. So Bill Whittle tweets this provably false thing. Is it different if Twitter puts a label on that and says, get the facts about mail-in ballots and provides a link to some other news source that counteracts what you just said? Is it different if that happens with you than if it happens with President Trump? In other words, should President Trump have more license to make claims than you do?
No. No. The platform is the platform. You either get to say what you want to or you don't. And we're back to the Nazis in Skokie again. Now we're back to people deciding who gets to say what they want to say and who doesn't. And what all of this ultimately comes down to, when you really get down to it, there's a level above the conservative and political, the conservative liberal divide. There's a level above that that's functioning, and it's functioning throughout all of big tech. And that is the idea that these people know what's best for us. That's really the problem. It's not so much the anti-conservative bias as it is the pro-elite bias. And the thing that is the most shocking about all of this is that the people who these tech companies have delegated the authority to determine things like truth and accuracy and inaccuracy and so on are not a group of august, gray-bearded old philosophers who gather their robes and consult upon these things. They are the most venal, stupid, arrogant, uneducated, nasty, snide bastards on the face of the earth. And that is yet another problem with this thing. So look, Scotty, this thing could go on forever and ever and ever, but it's the carrier thing. You are either responsible for the content on Twitter or you're not. If you are saying that you're not, if you're saying that if a celebrity says something that the earth is flat, and by the way, I think Donald Trump's claim that mail-in ballots have a potential for fraud is a considerably stronger argument than the argument for the flat earth, which a number of celebrities have been tweeting out for the last several years. I'm wondering why they didn't get a little tag sending them to the Wikipedia entry on the sun-centered model of the solar system and why it appears to be true. Why is it that the only time that they're applying this is to political speech, to the very top of political speech, and finally, in all of this, we're stuck with the realization that the only reason we're having this discussion in the first place is because Twitter is the only outlet where the President of the United States can speak directly to the American people without being spun, censored, edited, clipped, ignored, amplified. No, this is it. So I think we have a lot of serious business to do, and we had better, by God, do it during the time that the Justice Department is under the control of Republicans, because when it's not, we know what happens. The government gets weaponized against the people, and big tech gets weaponized against the people. I saw Bill Gates in an interview, and when he was told that 35 million people were out of work now, he burst into a very, very, very large smile. I found that response to be a little inappropriate and somewhat suspicious. So there you go.
Well, maybe Twitter should provide a link under that Bill Gates interview to an emoticon that's frowning. That would be the counter opinion on that subject. Ladies and gentlemen, we are glad that you are able to watch this, and I want you to know that that only happens because of a group of people that we call the members at BillWhittle.com. If you're not yet one of them, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click that big green Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.